Welcome to Backup Exec 2012 Archiving Options for Backup Exec. If you're following along in the course materials, this is Appendix D. In this lesson, we'll talk about the archiving option at a very general level. We'll explain the idea behind data archiving. We'll state the key components of the archiving option. We'll describe the support for Microsoft Exchange and file systems to be archived. Then we'll discuss how to install the archiving option. This option adds services to your Backup Exec server. Then we'll take a look at archiving Exchange mailboxes and then archiving file systems. We'll describe how to create an archive job. We'll go through how to restore from the archives, and then we'll talk about protecting the archiving option components. Let's begin with an introduction to archiving. Archiving is the act of taking the data off of the production location where the users access it. So if it's the Exchange server, we're removing the mail from the Exchange server and putting it into a vault that Backup Exec then manages. This vault store is a way of organizing the data that's coming off of the production locations. So in this screenshot you see here, you would probably have a vault store for user data and a different vault store for Exchange mailboxes. The vault stores are simply markers to paths where the data will be located. So we remove the data from its primary storage location, put it into a vault store that is managed by Backup Exec, and then you can recover it from the vault store as needed or recover it from a backup as needed. The idea is that it frees up the space on your primary production servers. The archiving option integrates with Microsoft Exchange and any file servers to allow you to free up that space and store everything in a vault store. The archiving options for Backup Exec are powered by Enterprise Vault version 9 technology. File systems and Exchange archiving are done separately. They're sold as separate licenses to Backup Exec. So I would have to purchase a file system archiving option to install on the Backup Exec server and purchase Exchange separately. So the file system archiving option allows me to archive files based on their age. For example, any file that's more than 2 years old that's not been modified in 2 years would be archived. Or I could do it based on size. So any file greater than 50 megs will be archived. You set those parameters. It deletes the original from the Windows server to free up the storage space. And it fully indexes everything that gets put into the vault for complete search capability. So you can search at a very precise level anything that's been stored in the vault and recover based on those searches. The Exchange mailbox archiving option is designed to reduce the capacity of the data that's on your Exchange server, so your backups will be smaller. It does support Exchange 2003, 2007, 2010, and Exchange 2010 in a DAG configuration. You can archive the inbox for any user you choose and the sent items for any users you choose. The way the archiving options work is you obviously must install them first on the Backup Exec server. You're going to create your vault store. A vault store is a way of sorting the data that I'm pulling off of my production servers. As part of that vault store, I create a vault partition, which is a path to where the data will be located once it comes off the production server. A vault store can have many vault partitions. As the paths get full, as the partitions reach their limit, you can create new paths for the vault store to use. So now I have a storage location. I'm going to back up the data from the production server and then run an archiving job. The archiving job is going to look at the content of the backup to determine what needs to go into the vault. And then it will place the data in the vault from the backup of the production data. Once you back up the vault, the default is that you must back up the vault, and then the data will be deleted from the source. You can restore any items that you would like from the vault. You can manually delete items from the vault, and you can say how long any data will live in the vault. So after it has passed its expiration period in the vault, it will be deleted automatically. So another view of this process is that you must back up the data, whether it be from a file server or Exchange server, and it will go into a standard backup exec backup, preferably to disk. These work much better if they are backups to disk. So for a point-in-time recovery, you could recover from the backup just as any other backup. Then you run an archiving job that says what criteria it will take to take files and populate the archives, the vaults. The vaults are always populated from the backups. Then you need to back up the archives or the vaults. Each vault has a database that's associated with it that keeps all of the criteria for how long it lives in the vault and where did it come from originally. So you back up the vaults and the associated databases. At that point, backup exec will go out and delete the original item from the source. So it frees up the space on the Exchange server or the file server. You can change that default so that it can delete immediately after it puts the items in the vault, but it is much safer to leave that at default and let it do the delete from the source after the vaults have been backed up. So a vault store is simply a way of sorting the data and providing a path to where it will be stored. So it can contain one or more logical archives. We'll talk about that in a moment. Vault stores always have an associated database that keeps track of where the data came from, so that if you need to restore it from the vault, by default it will go back to the same location from which it was backed up. It defines the characteristics of how data populates the vault. So does the data have to be more than 18 months old? Does it have to be over a certain size? In the case of Exchange, you can say only archive email that has attachments. So all that criteria is kept in the database. These vault stores are not accessible to users. Users don't see these, but they can restore data that is contained in the vault store. A vault store is simply a grouping for the data and the vault partitions. A vault partition is the actual path to where the data is stored. So the first step after installing the archiving options is to create vault stores in which to archive your data. An archive is associated with the data that was archived. So when we archive a user's mailbox, the user's mailbox is always theirs no matter when we archive it. But the first time we archived it, we sent the data to a path on a D drive. And then the D drive got full. And so we sent the data to a path on an E drive. It's still the same user's mailbox. So it's an archive for that user. It may cross partitions and be stored in multiple locations, but it's still the archive for that user's mailbox. So this is a logical designation that says we backed up this user's mailbox and this is where their data is going to be stored. So it can be applied to a mailbox, it can be applied to file systems. So archives can span partitions. Backup Exec will automatically create one archive per Exchange mailbox or per user folder if you're backing up user folders. Vault partitions are the physical path to where the data is stored. Any vault store can have multiple partitions. These partitions must be created on NTFS volumes. They extend the disk space of the vault store. So the vault store may fill up one partition. You'll close that partition and open another. Vault partitions cannot be deleted once they've been populated, and you can only have one open partition for any vault store. So the act of opening a new partition for a vault store will automatically close any existing partitions. And Backup Exec does that for you. So in this graphic, we're trying to represent all of the concepts that we've just talked about. That a vault store is a way of organizing the data that I am archiving. A partition is the logical path, the physical path to where it's going to be placed. The archive is the logical designation for the data. So the data is stored in a partition, but it belongs to a specific user's mailbox. And when that partition closes and a new partition opens, the archive is still archiving that same user's mailbox. So an archive is logical, a partition is physical, a vault store is a way of sorting, and every vault store has a database associated with it that keeps track of where did the data come from, to which archive does it belong, and where should I put it back in the case of I have to restore it, and how long can it live in the vault. Data cannot be added to closed partitions. Once a partition has closed, it can only remain closed. Over time, the data that's in those partitions will be deleted as its expiration occurs. So partitions that are closed can be reduced in size, but they can never get larger. The archiving options are licensed for each file system that you wish to archive and per Exchange mailbox that you wish to archive. So if I purchase the file system archiving option, it is per server. The Exchange mailbox archiving option is purchased per mailbox with 10 and 100 user pack licenses. You can run an evaluation with the core product, but to do full archiving, you do need to have licenses for this. So this is a general overview of the architecture. That Backup Exec server will be running the Enterprise Vault services that power archiving, which are all driven by SQL databases that will be housed on the Backup Exec server. I use the Backup Exec interface to control the archiving, and if you're archiving Exchange mailboxes, you need to have the Backup Exec agent for Exchange. You can create partitions and vault stores in any drive space that the Backup Exec server can access. So this could be a NAS or a SAN device. Partitions can even span devices. A partition is just the path, and it can be on any device that Backup Exec can access. Then Backup Exec will need access to the servers that you wish to archive. Initially, it's going to have to back them up. So the agent for Windows must be on any machine that you wish to archive. Virtual vaults are cached copies of the vaults that users can access themselves. They're very similar to an offline file for Microsoft Outlook. So it's a locally cached copy of the vault that users can then access if they choose to retrieve items out of the vault. You can choose whether or not to make virtual vaults available to users. To install the archiving option, the backup exec server must have enough space to store the index files, which are going to be about 8% of the size of the archive data. The indexes must be on an NTFS volume. The backup exec server must be in the same time zone as the file servers and Exchange servers. So if you are trying to archive to a data center, you must have the backup exec server in the same time zone as the servers you're archiving. And backup exec must be in the same domain as the servers you're archiving. If you would like to do file system archiving, the server must be in the same domain. The backup exec logon account and the Vault service account credentials must be the same. So I can't specify different account credentials for this. I have to have one account that has access to both. It must have full control of share permissions on the share that's selected for archiving. Symantec does recommend that Outlook be installed on the backup exec server so that backup exec can index any MSG files that are associated with an archive. For Exchange, the archiving option requirements are you must be running Exchange 2003, Exchange 2007, or Exchange 2010. We've said before the server and the Exchange server must be in the same domain and the same time zone. The logon account and the Vault service account credentials must also be the same. You must have the backup exec agent for applications and databases enabled on the backup exec server for the agent for Microsoft Exchange. And Outlook 2003 or 2007 must be installed on the backup exec server. This is used for indexing the emails that are being archived. The system mailbox has to be configured. Backup exec needs that to backup Exchange anyway. And disk-based backups, which are GRT enabled, can still be archived. So if you're doing your regular backups as GRT-based backups, you can still archive from those backups. Each license supports 10 mailboxes. The licensing per mailbox is very inexpensive. Check with your distributor. To install the archiving options, we're going to go to the Backup Exec button, Installation and Licensing. It will ask you for a serial number or a license key. And then you can select either the File System Archiving option or the Exchange Mailbox Archiving option. They're licensed independently of one another. You'll have to provide credentials that has rights to access Exchange or the file system. It's going to ask you for the path to where the databases will be located. So this must be a local NTFS volume, and it will be installing SQL Express for these databases. It will tell you that it's going to do the installation. And as the installation goes, it will add services to the backup exec server. Very few of the backup exec options change the server itself, but the archiving options are one that do. They add services to the backup exec server. Once the installation completes, it is a good idea to restart all of the backup exec services. Not required, but a good idea. Same is true if you want to install the Exchange Mailbox Archiving option, and you could do both at the same time if you were licensed to do both. So enter the credentials, enter the path. You do need to enter a DNS alias, and the installation will continue. For the footprints, these archiving options are going to add services to your backup exec server. You'll see them listed as Enterprise Vault services, since this is the technology that's driving the archiving options. They must use the same credentials as the backup exec service account, and I can use the Backup Exec Service Manager to change credentials as needed. This is all based on Enterprise Vault version 9 technology. When you install the Backup Exec archiving options, it will enable a registry key on your Backup Exec server that shows that these archiving options are embedded in Backup Exec. The archiving options don't have as many options as fully licensed Enterprise Vault. Fully licensed Enterprise Vault allows a great deal more indexing and granular management. So if you should choose at some point in the future to install fully licensed Enterprise Vault to get the further functionality, this embedded registry key allows Enterprise Vault to say, I understand there are archives here that had been being managed by Backup Exec, and now they're going to be managed by fully licensed Enterprise Vault. So it gives you an upgrade path from the Backup Exec archiving options to fully licensed Enterprise Vault that has data accelerators for search capabilities, that has greater functionality for larger environments mostly. Some of the best practices for the archiving options are that I use one Backup Exec server to archive each server that I wish to archive. Don't archive a server from two different Backup Exec servers. You'll wind up pulling things that you didn't expect to. You need to run archive jobs outside of the regular backup window. So if you think about the process, you run the backup, then you run an archiving job that populates the vault store, and then I back up the vault, and only then will it go out and delete the data from the source. So the archiving jobs that are reading the backups need to run at least after the backups have finished, but it's all local to the Backup Exec server. So these could run during production hours. You should select shares that users can access across the network rather than administrative shares. And we'll see that in the interface. By default, users cannot restore anything that was archived through an administrative share. And you need to back up the archiving option vault stores. By default, that's the way data is deleted from the source. So let's take a look at archiving Microsoft Exchange mailboxes. I can archive anything that is mail. I can select mailboxes based on groups, and I can set the criteria based on groups. So for example, I could have a group of directors and say that I want to only archive off mail for them that is 3 years old or older. And I could have another group for secretaries that I want to archive off email for them that is 6 months old or older. So you can set the different criteria for different groups. You can organize your mailboxes into groups and set the criteria for how large the emails must be before you archive them off. The Exchange servers containing those mailboxes must be accessible by Backup Exec, and I can archive permissions so that they're synchronized with the mailbox permissions. So as permissions change, if the director gives a different secretary rights to email on his behalf, those permissions would also be archived, and she would be able to restore emails on his behalf. So email and folder permissions are synchronized. I cannot archive specific items from Exchange. Things that cannot be archived are any messages that have pending reminders, anything other than email messages, so that is contacts, calendar items, those cannot be archived, and mail messages that are publicly available or in journals. These have to be user mailboxes that are being archived. And you cannot archive from backups made prior to Backup Exec 2012. So you need to run a new backup using Backup Exec 2012 before you can archive off anything from that Exchange server. You do have to grant permissions on the Exchange server for Backup Exec and the archiving options to be able to access the mailbox to be archived. We'll take a look at granting those permissions in detail. You can grant permissions at an organization level or an administrative group level, or you can grant permissions explicitly on each Exchange server. To grant permissions at an organizational level in Exchange Server 2003, follow the directions that you see listed on this screen. These are specific to the version of Exchange you are running. There are many steps involved. This is also listed in a knowledge base article on Symantec.com/support. To grant permissions in Exchange Server 2007, you need to run this from a command line. Again, follow the directions you see listed here or in the materials for your course. These are also listed in knowledge base articles that you can download from Symantec. Granting permissions in Exchange 2010 are done from PowerShell, and the service account should have send as rights on the mailbox. Again, follow what's here or in your book or from the knowledge base article. Mailbox groups are something you create in the Backup Exec interface to assign criteria by which to remove the mail from the Exchange server. So you see at the bottom of this screen the archiving rules. Archive items that are older than 6 months in this example, if they are larger than 10 megs, or if they have messages with attachments. When you click multiple checkboxes, as in this screenshot, every criteria must be met before the mail will be archived. So these are evaluated on an AND basis instead of an OR basis. So if I wanted to archive only messages with attachments, make sure that that is the only thing that is marked. You can create your own groups of mailboxes by which to assign the archiving criteria. We'll take a look at that. This screenshot also shows you right under the users field, you see enable virtual vault for this mailbox group. This allows the user to have a local copy of what's in the vault, so if they wanted to restore from the vault, they could from that local copy. So you can configure groups so that some groups have a virtual vault and some groups do not. They will take up space on the user's local machine. To run an archiving job for Exchange, the first step is to back up the Exchange server as you would if you took archiving out of the picture. So a standard Backup Exec backup of the Exchange server, and then it will apply the archiving rules to identify the email messages that should be archived when the archiving job runs. It checks the vault to see if the eligible messages have already been archived. If the answer is yes, it does not archive them again. If the answer is no, then it adds the data to the archive, and the data is indexed to enable very fast search capability. By default, you would then need to run a backup of the vault store itself before the data is deleted from the Exchange server. To archive a file system, what can be archived from the file system is any file that's in a user accessible share, not an administrative share, the permissions of the files, and those permissions will be synchronized so that you must have rights to do the restore before you can do the restore, and the same selection cannot be made in multiple archiving jobs. So when I archive a directory, I can only archive it once. Things that cannot be archived in file systems are hard links, files that have already been archived, parse points, things that are not files, right? Files that have been encrypted or hidden or have system attributes like thumbs.db, or files that have mount point directories. So it can only archive real files. The process for running a file system archive job is the same process that we saw for Exchange. So the first step is to back up the file system that you wish to archive, and then the archive job itself will read the files from the backup and apply the rules and determine the criteria by which files need to be sent to the vault. It will check to see if the files already exist in the vault. If they do not, then the data will be added to the vault. The default behavior at that point is that you should run a backup of the vault itself, and then the archiving options will delete the data from the original source. Retention categories have to do with how long the data stays in the vault. So this is counted from the time it got into the vault in the first place. So you have to think the whole process through. My criteria was that I did not remove it from the Exchange server until it was a year old on Exchange. So the email is already 1 year old before it gets into the vault. At that point, my retention category says I'm going to keep it in the vault for 2 years. So that email will exist in my environment for a total of 3 years altogether. So retention categories are how long does the data stay in the vault once it has moved into the vault. I can modify that time, but that's going to impact how long it stays in the vault. So if I had originally said 2 years and I changed my mind and said 1 year, if I change that, anything that's been inside the vault for more than 1 year will automatically be deleted. Retention categories can be configured at the same time the archive job is created, or you can set them all in advance and then just use the ones that you have created already. So I can create retention categories based on data type. Different types of data generally need to be kept for different amounts of time. Finance data may need to be kept for 7 years for tax purposes, where email for inter-office email may only be kept for a very short time. To create a retention category, in the mailbox group where you create your groups, you can say new retention category, and then you set how long the data will be kept in the archive, in the vault. The archiving rules are then applied based on those retention categories. To create an archive job, this is after you have run the backup of the original data. We need to install the archiving option, create the vault store, back up the data that we wish to archive, then run the archive, and then run a backup of the vault store itself, and then the data will be deleted from the source. So let's start with configuring the vault store. I configure it like any other storage device in Backup Exec. So we'll click on Storage and Configure Storage and select Archiving. Under Archiving, we're going to select Vault Store. The very first time you do this, that's the only option available. Later, we'll see Vault Partitions as an option available on the number 4 screen showed here. I give my Vault Store a name, and then I give it the path to the vault partition. This is the physical location where the data will be stored. This path should not be on the C drive. When do I want archiving to delete from the original location? The default is what you see on this screen, which is after the vault store has been backed up. You can change it to immediately after it's archived, but please keep in mind that if you do that and anything happens to the vault store, it's going to be much more difficult to do the restore so that it goes back into the vault store. So the best practice is to leave this at the default and let the data get deleted from the source after the vault store has been backed up. And that protects you in the event that the vault store items get corrupt or broken in any way. You can restore from backup. It gives you a summary of what you've done, and then you'll see it as a storage device on your storage tab. So the vault store simply becomes another location on your storage tab. You can check the properties of this. It will show you the size, and it will show you the item delete method. You can also edit that from here. To create a vault partition, we're going to go through the same process. We're going to create a new storage definition and select archiving, but now you see vault store partition as part of this screen. You can only have one open vault store partition per vault store. So I say which vault store I'm going to add a new path. I give that path a name, and then I provide the physical path for where the data will be kept. And it asks you if you want to use this immediately. Do I want to store new data in this path? If you say yes, which is the default, and any other vault store partitions are open, it will automatically close any older partition and create this new partition as an open partition. Once a partition has been closed, no data can be added to it. It can only be deleted from it when the data expires. It does give you a summary, and when I look at the properties of the vault store itself, it will show me the various partitions that are associated with that vault store, their paths and their state, whether they are open or closed. Now we're ready to add an archive stage to a backup workflow. So we've created our vault store, we've backed up the source data, and we're ready to archive. So we're going to create a backup to disk and then archive, first choice. You can also do a backup to tape and archive. These take a bit longer. So this is just an additional stage to a standard backup workflow. You can edit the archive stage so that it will show me the shares that will be archived. So these can be different than what you backed up. Maybe I backed up the whole server and I only want to archive a few files or directories. By default, it does not show administrative shares. Users cannot restore archived items from administrative shares. And I can set the criteria by which data will be archived. If I want to change the default criteria, I click on the button that says New Archive Settings. This is where I can create retention categories and set rules by which the data will be archived. The rules are followed from the top down, so they're followed in the order that you see listed. So in this example, they're saying they're going to exclude media files and include anything that has not been accessed in 6 months or not modified in 2 months. You can add whatever criteria you want here. You can add includes and excludes. You can also be very specific. So I could say only archive star.doc files that have not been accessed in 6 months, and it would ignore anything that is outside of that criteria. These are followed from the top down, so it is very important that you use the least specific at the top and work down to the most specific rule at the bottom of the list. Now you'll see that you have the various paths that are being included and excluded, and you can change the archive settings for each individual path. If we're looking at Exchange, then I can set the options for archiving Exchange. By default, it will enable, you must enable archiving for Exchange mailboxes. You can also edit the groups from this screen. So if I would like to create a new mailbox group and assign the criteria for archiving to that group, I can do that from here. To create a new mailbox group, you simply tick the checkbox for any mailboxes that you wish to be a member of that group, and you give the group a name. The archiving will be done based on the criteria for each group, and each group can have different criteria. So archive items that are older than 4 weeks or 10 weeks or a year. Please keep in mind in the archive rules that it must meet all of the criteria that you have selected. Anything that's in that archiving rules is evaluated as an and instead of an or. File system archiving jobs are set up the same way. I'm going to say backup to disk and then archive. The archive is simply an additional stage in the backup. In the file system archiving job, you can select the schedule for when the archiving job will occur. This should occur after the backup is finished, preferably during the least peak time for your backup. So usually this is going to be during working hours because you run your backups during non-working hours. This can be whatever schedule you like. Keep in mind that the archiving job simply populates the vaults, and the delete will happen by default after the vaults have been backed up. You can also notify anyone you choose to that this archiving job has completed. For the file system selections, this is where I say which files will be archived, and I set the criteria by which they will be archived, and to where will the archives be written. So to which vault store should I write this data? It appears as simply another stage of a standard backup job. For the Exchange archive jobs, the schedule is a little bit more precise. You can still run this during working hours because it is not touching the Exchange server. It is simply populating the vaults from the previous backup of the Exchange server. So this should be all local to the backup exec server. Single instance storage allows backup exec to store any item one time. So let's say for a moment that I were to email this PowerPoint presentation to several different users in my organization. We would all save the same file into our user directory. If we were to archive that user directory, instead of archiving the same file many times, single instance storage says we could restore it for anyone who requests it if it's the same file, so let's only store it once. You have to enable single instance storage, and this allows the vaults to be much more efficient. So it allows a great reduction in the storage space required for your vaults. To enable single instance storage, I need to go to the Backup Exec button select Configuration and Settings. Under the Backup Exec settings, go to Archive and make sure that the Enable Single Instance Storage checkbox is marked. It needs to be ticked. If you'd like to know about the default settings, please go see the user guide. It will tell you which settings are default. We can also synchronize permissions. This allows the permissions to match the data as it existed on the original source, and so whoever has rights to it on the original source can also do restores and pull the data out of the vault. Let's take a look at the actual screen where you set this. So this is under Settings, Archive. You can say when you want to synchronize permissions. The default is at 3 a.m. Do I want to enable single instance store? So I only store unique items one time. You can set your retention categories here. My virtual vault setting is where will the data be cached on the client's local machine and how much space can it occupy. So that's on the client machine. I can also manage archive settings here. These are the criteria by which files will be archived, and mailbox groups. You can do these in the job or from the global level. To restore data from the archives, you can use Backup Exec as you would to do any other restore. So these are known as administrative restores. These can be restored to the same location from which the data was archived, or it can be redirected. Access permissions are not restored. It simply restores the data. Archives may contain multiple versions of a file. The archiving options do file versioning, and so when you do your restores, you need to be very conscious of which version of the file you are restoring for your user. The default is it will restore the most recent. To do my restore, it's like any other restore in Backup Exec. We're going to say we want to restore files and folders, but we're going to restore it from archives rather than backup. It will show you all of the files that have been archived, and you select the ones that you wish to restore and then select where you want that data to go. If you choose to redirect, you can choose to redirect to any location that the Backup Exec server can see. However, write rights may be different than the system logon account that was used to read the data in the first place. So be sure that you have appropriate permissions to write that data to the redirected location. And then how do you want the data to be restored? Do I want to restore over the top or skip it if the file exists? You can run commands before and after like any other standard restore job in Backup Exec. You give your job a name and tell it when you want it to run. Backup Exec will give you a summary of the restore, and you'll see it as any other restore job in the jobs screen. Exchange data works very much the same. We're going to restore exchange data, only we're going to restore from archived data. You select individual pieces that you would like to restore and the path to which they will be restored. If you choose to redirect, you can, and how do you want it to handle if it already exists? You may run pre and post commands and set the schedule. Restores usually are run now. Backup Exec will show you a summary, and then you can watch the job if you choose to. You can also delete from the archives. This is a manual delete. Remember, that's what retention categories are for. Retention categories say how long the data will live in the vault. If you would like to manually delete, you need to go to Backup and Restore and click the Delete from Archive button on the far right. It will then show you all the data that's in the archive, and you can delete anything from here. It does give you a confirmation, and you'll see this run as a job. You can also search the archives. So just the act of archiving the data, tremendous indexes are kept, and you can search on much greater criteria than you can native Windows applications. So you've got a much greater search capability in the archive than you do in regular Outlook. So I can search the archive based on how long it's been in there. I can use wildcard characters. I can search for name. I can search for date and timestamp when it was modified. We'll take a look at those screens. So if I tell it to search, you can tell it when it was backed up that you would like to search. I can name the path. I can name any file and folder. And so you can choose the archive time, when it expires, when the file was modified. It will come back to you with a list of files that meet your criteria, and you can tick the checkbox for what you would like to be able to restore. Exchange is much the same, only this time we're going to search mail messages. You can set who they were from. You can read both the subject line and the content of the email in your search, and then you can select what you choose to restore. You need to back up the archives and the vaults before it will delete the data, but there's more to this backup than just backing up the vaults. You also need to protect the databases that are associated with those vaults. So let's take a look at protecting the archiving option components as a whole. The archiving option components include a directory database. There are several databases involved here. There's a database for each vault store. Each vault store has partitions. It can have one open partition and many closed partitions. You would only need to back up the closed partitions once in a while because those can't have data added to them. They can only have data deleted from them. The open partition can be changed any time that an archiving job runs. A best practice would be to back up all of the archiving option components at the highest level possible for the easiest data recovery. So when I back up the archiving option components, you'll see them listed as SQL databases. It will use the SQL agent technology to back up these databases. It will also show you the closed partitions. So the best practice would be to select the archiving option components at the top level and then deselect the closed partitions. Those don't need to be backed up on a regular basis. Everything else should be backed up together, and if necessary of doing a restore, you need to restore it together as much as possible. Backup Exec will run consistency checks against those databases. By default, it runs a physical consistency check, which is the least intrusive, both before a backup job and after a restore job automatically. If the consistency check fails, you'll get an alert in Backup Exec. And the physical check only is the least intrusive of all the SQL consistency checks. You can restore any of the archiving option components that you need to. Typically, you only need to restore data out of these, so that's where I'm searching as if it were a backup instead of restoring the components themselves. Many of these databases must be restored together so that they're synchronized. There are some good knowledge base articles. If you have to recover the Backup Exec server with these databases from other backups, you need to follow those knowledge base articles. You can redirect the restore of the archiving options within some leeway. Some of these databases must live on the Backup Exec server. Backup Exec will allow you to redirect what is capable of being redirected. So in this lesson, we have learned about the concept of data archiving, the key components for the Backup Exec archiving options, how those archiving options support both Microsoft Exchange and the file systems. We've also discussed how to install the archiving option, how to archive from Microsoft Exchange mailboxes, how to archive from file systems, how to create the jobs that do that archiving, how to restore from the archives, and how to protect the archiving option components.